What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to my channel. So I've been getting a ton of emails regarding a Baccarat strategy that has been going around called Majority 6. This strategy was originally posted by Shy773 guy. So shout outs to you, Chicago guy. And in this video, I will do a quick overview of how the Majority 6 strategy works. I will give you my thoughts and adjustments, and we will play an online session using the Majority 6 with our bet spreads. So stay tuned. Okay, let's dive right into how to play Majority 6. So you will be looking at each column on the bead road, and basically you'll be betting against a column having an even distribution between banker and player. In other words, you're betting against a 3-3 tie between banker and player. Now, there are some instances where even though a 3-3 tie happened in a column, you can still come out with a win. But we'll get to that in just a minute. So you would start off with a fresh shoe, take a free hand on column number 1, and let's say a player comes up. Okay? You now have a majority of 1-0 in the player's favor, so you would go ahead and place a bet on player. And you win. What happens after a win? You would stop and wait for the next column. But let's say you lose and a banker comes up. We now have a 1-1 situation. Okay, the game is tied, so there isn't a majority, which means you would have to take another free hand. Let's say another banker comes up. The majority is now 2-1 in the banker's favor, so again, you would place your bet on banker this time. And there is a win. Again, you would stop and wait for column number 2. But what happens if you lose your second bet? As you can see, a 2-2 has happened on column number 1. So if you lose 2 bets per column, you would stop and wait for the next column. So we're only looking at 2 losses per column. Now, regarding ties, if a tie shows up during a column, you can continue to bet on that column. If 2 ties show up during a column, you would then need to stop and skip that column, wait for the next one. Now, as you all know, on this channel, we don't record ties, so this doesn't really affect us. And that is pretty much it for how to play the Majority 6. Nice and simple, a straightforward strategy. Now, here are my thoughts and adjustments for this strategy. As you all know, I love betting on things not to happen. Okay, so right off the bat, I do like the Majority 6. With that being said, I have a few adjustments that I personally would make to the Majority 6. Now, keep in mind that this is my personal opinion. If you choose to follow it, great. If not, I respect it. We all have different opinions, different play styles. So just throwing that out there. Okay, so the first issue I've come across are the chops. A choppy shoe will absolutely destroy the Majority 6 strategy, and that is because the math is not on our side. Chops happen 50% of the time in Baccarat. And yes, I do know that some shoes will be streaking left and right, but overall, chops happen 50% of the time. And if you are against chops, it is going to give you some trouble in the long term. So not a good idea to be against the chop. So here is how I would play the Majority 6. I will have 2 triggers. My first trigger is a 2 in a row. Okay, so let's say the first free hand is banker. I don't believe a 1-0 is enough data to be a majority. There has to be at least 2 outcomes So like I said, my first trigger is a 2 in a row. Let's say another banker shows up. Okay, I am now ready to bet on banker. And there we go, there's a win. If I win, the same rules apply. We would stop and wait for the next column. But what if we lose? What if a player shows up? Well, as you can see, we have a 2-to-1 majority for the banker. So I would place another bet on banker. And we win. Again, we would stop and wait for the next column. But what if we lose again? And another player shows up. We now have a 2-2 situation, no majority. So my second trigger is a 3-2. So whoever wins the next hand, that is where my next bet will be. So let's say another player shows up. We now have a 3-2 situation in favor of the player. So I'm going to place my next bet on player. And there we go. There is a win. We will now wait for column number 2. If a player does not show up and we get a banker instead, I would have 3 losses on a column because it would have tied 3-3. And yes, playing this way can give you a maximum of 3 losses per column instead of 2. But it is totally fine with me because I believe this is the best way to play the majority 6. Okay, let's go through another scenario. Let's say a player shows up, followed by a banker. I don't have my 2 in a row trigger just yet, so I have to continue to wait. Another player shows up. We have a 2-to-1 majority, but there is no 2 in a row trigger. So me personally, I am not going to bet this column just yet. I'm still looking for my 2 in a row. So this is one of the differences with how I would play it. So let's keep taking some free hands. Let's say another player showed up. We now have a 2 in a row. Sets off our trigger. I will now place my first bet on the column on player. If a player comes, great, we win. We move on to the next column. If a banker were to show up, we still have a 3-2 majority in favor of the player. So I will place my second bet again on player. And if we win, again, great. We move on to the next column. If we lose, the column has tied 3-3, which does happen, so be ready for that. You would take the loss and move on to the next column. So playing this way, you can have either 1 loss per column, 2 losses, or 3 losses per column. Let's try another scenario. Our first free hand is banker, followed by player, another banker. Can we bet? No, because there isn't a 2 in a row trigger. So let's keep taking some free hands. Another player. Can we bet now? No, still no 2 in a row trigger. Banker. What do we do in this situation? Well, my second trigger is a 3-2. So if we don't get a 2 in a row for a column, our next trigger is a 3-2. In this case, banker is leading 3-2 against player. So I'm going to place a bet on banker for this column. If a banker comes, great, we win. We move on to the next column. So playing this way, you would avoid the choppy streaks that come and still bet 1 time for that column to try to get a win and end the chop. If not, hey, you lost 1 bet for that column, not a big deal. You move on to the next column. And just remember, guys, that we don't record ties. So whenever a tie comes up, ignore it. Very important to keep your own scorecard. So there you go, my adjustments for the majority 6, how I would personally play it. Now, as far as money management goes, do not martingale, okay? Believe me, it does not work long term. We are going to use bet spreads instead. I'll put up the bet spread that I'll be using. Very simple. We're going to start off on level 1 with $5. and then 10, followed by 15. Level 2, 10, 20, 30. Level 3, if we get to it, $25 bets, and we are going to double up once after a win only. Okay, so let's take our bet spreads and our majority 6 with some adjustments. Go online and play a session.